Shackman. Ladies and gentlemen, Coco Ulysses. Ladies and gentlemen, Starla Thompson. Sugar man, see brown skin, see bear, see deer, see dog. Sugar man, see brown skin and shoes. Sugar man, see brown skin, see bear, see deer, see a dog. Sugar man, see brown skin and shoes. Bang, bang, bang. Oh, Lord, him go bang. Bang, bang, bang. Woo-wee. Bang, bang, bang. Little brown baby, hold nothing in your hand, not spear, not cotton, nor hemp. Oh, round baby, hold nothing in your hand, not spear, not cotton, or hemp. Just before skyscraper, before Lakeshore Drive, French know the Potawatomi and accommodating kind. All those grass blades, all those bones. The price when you sell children for land. Sugar man, see brown skin, see bear, see deer, see dog. Sugar man, see brown skin and shoes. Yeah, I'm sugar man, see brown skin, see bear, see deer, see dog every time. Sugar man, see brown skin and shoes. Him always shoes. Him always shoes. him always shoot. Him always shoot. Fall out on the one right there. All of those grass blades, all them bones. Starla Thompson, Andrew Schachman, Coco Elises. I'm Avery R. Young. Thank you all so much.
All right, welcome to you three, Andrew, Faheem, Avery.
Thank you.
And Jeremiah Hulsebos-Spofford is here in spirit. We have his words and his ideas with us at the moment. So we have a lot to talk about. We're just going to jump in.
Let's do it.
So I want to ask, just to begin, the four of you are busy individual artists with practices, diverse practices that span sculpture, architecture, performance, poetry, music, community practice, and learning, education, among others. So let's go back to the start, 2016, and I want to ask, why did you feel you needed to make time to think about the museum, let alone create one? So what was the impetus of this project?
If it's okay, I'll jump in. I think in a lot of ways, you know, it's funny when people call us the floating museum now, like it's a thing. It's a thing now, right? I mean, originally it wasn't a thing. We're not an actual museum. But I think in a lot of ways we were thinking about complementary, adjacent ways of moving to museums. Many of us have had relationships with museums in various capacities. We move in, we move out. And museums that we've worked with are also often working in community space. And there's always this kind of disconnect that we see. And as people who kind of move in between those spaces and see that disconnect, we were like, well, what if we kind of created a space that was an adjacent model? So versus kind of trying to change those spaces, we kind of like set by example. Like, what are the possibilities? We can be nimble, we move between the under $200,000, you know, kind of arts organization that's dealing day to day. You know, Tommy had a bad day, we got to shut down, we got to deal with something that's coming off the street, versus the large institution that's planning 3 years out. And this is the spaces that we all kind of know, and we're thinking about maybe an adjacent space that could happen. And there's a lot of really great kind of, we have lots of stories, right? But I think in a lot of ways, it's a passion project. It was something that we wanted to do and to make the cultural spaces that we love better. Yeah.
I'd also say I was living in France. I lived in France for 5 years before I met them. And when I came back to Chicago, I realized, you know, while I was in France, you would think living in Paris that everything would be very fulfilling. But I just, all that would happen is I would go to Nuit Blanche, which is like a all-night art exhibition, populates all kinds of spaces in the city, or they have Fête de la Musique, which also similarly big band shell, you know, premiere events, and then everywhere on every street corner till 5 in the morning, people from age 5 to 95, all out in the streets till 3 in the morning drinking wine, and all I could ever think about was, this would be great in Chicago. Chicago is a great framework for this. It has 600 parks, it has 438 field houses. And so when I came back to Chicago, this was a dream. And then I met 3 other people who had the same hallucination as I did about the city. You know?
It's also not bad to have an architect on your team because he can think about wind loads.
Yeah.
That part. Yes.
Okay, so there's a little bit about what the potential in Chicago was in terms of space and geography, the idea of the way you had been engaging with museums and other arts institutions, the possibility that there was something different and more. We'll come back to the nomadic mobile component, but moving into the idea of the relationship Floating Museum has with history. It's each of the projects is very deeply engaged with the notion of that. But the way I see it, it's less to interrogate the past or critique the canon per se, maybe more so to develop grounded, informed visions for what the future might be able to look like. That's kind of how I perceive it. Just as an example, 2 examples, to explore museum practice, the practice of collecting, building a collection. A project you've done is to bring objects outside, sometimes actual objects, sometimes duplicates that you create, presenting them in public spaces to see what happens when the public can engage with them outside of the museum space. That's a project you did. You've also referenced historic monuments in order to envision new ones. And your versions of those monuments are very different. They're ephemeral. They are often nomadic. They're not standalone, not monolithic. They engage with neighborhoods in really different ways. And we can talk about these in more detail. But kind of broadly speaking, how do you consider the work intervening in the history of public art in Chicago?
I think going back a little bit about when you're talking about like a museum has a collection, right? And I mean, going back is important for people to understand. The Floating Museum is not a space, it's the city. And the city's the museum, neighborhoods are the galleries, and the citizens are the cultural producers. That changes how you think about space a little bit. So I think activation is a word that you have to think about. It's not a static thing. It's like we take the idea of an object and then it's activated. We also think a lot about rehearsal, which I would say Avery really brought to the collective in a sense of constantly repeating, rehearsing, and building towards this performance that it's off, like everything's a rehearsal for the next thing. And I think that's something Avery really kind of brought to the stand in sense of performance and how that could also manifest in the ideas of making a spectacle object out in space with community. Yeah. So, oh yeah.
No, I was just saying that, what was that, 2018? I was invited to write, they were celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Picasso. And I focused the poem on the fact that when it was first introduced to the city, people were kind of like, well, what is it? Picasso was like, I'm Picasso, what are you worried about what it is? I'm Picasso. Why I don't get these questions. Look at these questions of what it is, things of that nature. But the children decided what it would be, which was going to be a slide, right? And I think that's like the thought I'm always thinking about what we're doing in regards to the way in which that relationship of how we're intervening with the history of public art in Chicago is that people decide things all the time with the statues and murals and all of these things that are placed in these various neighborhoods and these various parts that people really decide what is going to happen with them. And I think what we try to do is be more cognizant of the ways in which community folk engage with work that's just plumped into a community for aesthetic sake or the beautify, or just to say this is what this neighborhood should have because it's lacking of some type of cultural representation of art that's usually not or have less to do with the people who are actually living in the space. And so we actually like to consider the ways in which the public will then take the reins. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons, it's one of the reasons I was so excited about Sticks and Tape, because literally you get to make whatever this thing is now going to be standing in your backyard, basically, or your vacant lot, or whatever it is. And that's the way in which I think we're considering how we are adding to this conversation about the public and public art in Chicago.
For those that haven't seen it, Sticks and Tape is just that, and it actually came out. You see images of it, and it's actually, it came out of way of building in the Department of Cultural Affairs, because when we did a residency there in the beginning, we walked in, and they're like, oh, artists in residence, you're gonna kind of take over. And we walked in with our art tools, which were chop saws, planers, and all these like drills and stuff. And the union laborers were like, who are y'all and what y'all doing here with all that? And they were like, we the artists. We here for the resident. They're like, they don't look like paintbrushes. You can't come in. You need to make art. We make the art with our tools if it's wood. So Sticks and Tape really came out of response of like, we cut the wood down and we were figuring out how to build in the space. And then community came in and really started saying, hey, can we jump in? And we saw it as this great kind of way of engaging public to think about space and build. And everyone, there's a million different ways you can do it, from 5-year-olds to 80-year-old architects have joined into this. But these we call them one of our kits as well. It's like a kit that we take. It's a crowd favorite. We're like, yeah, inflatable, but can you bring the Sticks and Tape, please? And the tape kind of stays on it, and it shows a tracking. But going back a little bit to what Avery said, it's a little bit about language and intention, right? So the assumption is this: when we started out, we had funders who were like, it's so great you're taking art to the community. Some of these earlier images you see are in Calumet Park. And when we started out, it was Andrew's idea before we kind of did the big float down the river, which we'll look at in a minute. He's like, we need to rehearse. We need to practice working together. We need to practice working on the space. And when we went out to Calumet Park, we were going through the field house, which is in Southeast Chicago, the ironworks are gone. There's all these kind of like things that have happened to that community from the factories being pulled out. We walked into the park building, there was already a museum there, Southeast Historical Society. We were like, wait a minute, we got this idea for a museum, you're a museum. But they only opened on Thursdays from 12 to 3. We were like, okay. So then we showed them, we realized it was a retired community that really was like, we're gonna come when we wanna come. And they were in there feverishly working. So the images you see is them we negotiated to bring their things outdoors for a day, and the only way people could navigate them was really to talk to the people. So it's once again, it's not what we originally intended, but it's this sense of listening and not with the notion of bringing art to a community. I don't care where you go on this planet, there's gonna be someone on the block, Ms. Jenkins, whoever, that's taking money out their pocket to support the kids, and they doing art. A lot of times they don't get the support, but what if they got the support and the network? And that's a lot of how we go into space. We don't go into space with our ideas fully formed.
That's a I think, important distinction that you're describing right now, that really it's the impulse to present projects, to present, participatory sculpture and make these spaces is less about what is omitted and what's missing.
Yeah.
And it's really more about, you said listening, and also kind of considering the history of public art in Chicago, these iconic forms, looking at how they are actually utilized and how people, children, others, make sense of them and play and live with them in a way that might be unintended or unintentional by the artist. But you're looking at the lived reality of these and leaning into how those can be even more expansive, playful.
Right. I can't tell you how many record covers I've seen where people just use the skyline as the backdrop and they pay for nothing. Just when it got a camera to but that's what I'm saying. The people decide this thing, and it's a beautiful skyline, right? And why not? Right? Why not stand in front of it and flex, right? But that's what people have decided to do. The community, and it's really interesting because I always think our work is just really framing what's already there, because sometimes the people don't understand it, right? Ms. Jenkins is just doing the work.
She's just doing the work.
She's doing the work.
Twice about it.
Right? It doesn't matter to her. It doesn't matter to her that it's on the MCA stage,
right.
or if it's at the park, right? She could put some chairs in her backyard.
That's right.
and get some lights.
Christmas lights.
Right, some Christmas lights, and it's gonna be showtime at the Apollo. it's gonna do what it do, and it's my first play, right? Was a Miss Jenkins who had the key to the church around the corner, and we rehearsed, and we had like the play in the pulpit, and it was like everything that has me sit on this stage today, right?
And Andrew, I'm sorry, I just call it these images just real quick.
Yeah.
Why it's important also to not make assumptions, right? So when we started out, we also were doing a residency in a park. And one of the parks we were kind of working at was West Pullman Park. And in West Pullman Park, they have Miss St. George, who's in the basement. She works with a special needs adult group, right? And my child used to go there, and I knew this community. And they take art classes, right? And then we're also working with Project Onward, who we've committed with, right? They're artists that also have very special needs, but they're professional artists, right? The assumption is that these two groups are the same. So the work was to actually raise money for the bus to get them to come to the Sable, both groups to come to the Sable. One group gets to show in the museum because artists need to show in museums. The other group gets to come in and see people who have similar challenges making art in the museum, so they connect with the museum, they see something in themselves in the way, but they're not artists, but they like artwork. The assumption is to treat both of these groups have similar things because of similar challenges, right? And it's really to take the time to listen and figure out the nuances. And that's not something we know. Like, we can't know those things. We have to sit and listen and say what we don't know. And we don't know a lot. And leave space for the people who do know to come in. So this is Adam. He's he calls himself the biggest artist in Chicago. He made his DeSable piece that he wanted to show. He's at Project Onward, if y'all know Project Onward.
I was going to say that I think we also think from an urbanistic point of view. You know, before Kitihawa and DeSable and fur trade and Fort Dearborn and the development of Chicago, the landscape changed according to different processes with different kinds of timings. And then capitalism rolls in, and the landscape, if you read William Cronin's Nature's Metropolis, the landscape starts to become a way that capitalism reproduces itself. You know, you have the Jeffersonian grid, exchangeable parcels of land, infrastructure is created, and a lot of those things are the encodings of various generations of ideals physically in the landscape. And I think we think a lot about who participated in shaping that and who is excluded from participation in shaping that, and ways of thinking about infrastructure, which also, you know, like the green line tends to cross boundaries of different constituencies in space, and how the land is already a kind of index of a cultural history, as opposed to just a monument broadcasting cultural history. The land is a monument to a certain kind of process. So when we engage, I think we're also interrogating all of those layers of that space and trying to see curating them and seeing what makes sense depending on who's showing up, what constituencies are showing up, what kind of conversation needs to happen. So I'm just going back to your question about history. I think for us, you know, the Jeffersonian grid also makes the landscape into what you would superimpose onto an archaeological site, a kind of grid that indexes position just by the fact of the way it's developed. So it's a kind of like memory mnemonic field, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. One of the things, if y'all haven't picked up, each of us has a very different entry point. And if any one of us gave this talk, it would be a very different talk. If you haven't picked up on that yet, which is the benefit of having kind of co-directors. But I want to say the thing that Andrew, for me, that was so helpful and wonderful when he started talking about language of space. And like when you cross the street, I remember when I had this, he said, when you cross the street from the CTA to Austin Town Hall, and he laid out, well, you're crossing through CDOT territory, Chicago Transit Authority territory, streets and sanitation, Park District, you're talking through maybe certain gang territory, you're talking, it was like and he just showed me this image of like a video of moving from one space to the other space, and think about this notion of stakeholders that are present and not present or visible.
Right. And we know the biggest stakeholder is the
director over at the field house.
Right. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Who ordered this?
That I think kind of weaves together this idea of, I referenced the canon, the idea of what is missing, what is omitted, what's not there, and that's the kind of other side of the coin of what exists, is underutilized for all the various important structural reasons, and also undervisioned. Like, I think, Andrew, your point is that when we're talking about envisioning new monuments, physical or otherwise, you're rethinking what a commemorative monument should and can be. To refer to the land as a living index and monument is not something that we can take for granted that everybody thinks that way. But once that idea can be put forward, that then shapes the way we understand monuments in Chicago, for example.
And also, I mean, I think, say the train system was conceived from a functionalist point of view. How do you get from point A to point B? It's kind of a space-time collapse machine. And it serves certain people really well, and it excludes other people depending on where it's located really well. The expressway system does the same thing. But those things are also, for example, the trains are a democratic space. It's a public realm. It's also a cultural space as a result of that. The river, too, which I think served the shipping and movement of rubble from a site to build a new Apple store, or the production of Chicago physically, is also now becoming a cultural infrastructure that crosses boundaries. So we think a lot about the kind of second definition of those infrastructure systems as opposed to the functionalist ones.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, let's get into these. I think we were talking kind of conceptually about what motivates you, the thinking, the philosophy. Let's get into a couple of examples. Okay. So we can begin with the River Assembly, an early project, I think, that allowed Floating Museum to experiment with what being nomadic looks and feels like in Chicago. And we know, and you all reference, the fact that art exhibitions have been mobile for a very long time. You reference the roving Cabinet of Curiosities, Duchamp's Portable Museum, and precedents prior to that. But these find really kind of interesting contemporary counterpoints in Chicago's artist-run culture. There's so many projects, today really active. I'm thinking Terrain Biennial, AM/FM, Concerned Black Image Makers do nomadic programming, or individual artist projects like William Estrada's art cart that he moves around the city. And I think a floating museum is living within this tradition and inside this culture.
Sure. Yeah.
So there's so many wonderful examples here. But River Assembly specifically was looking at the history of the river and that movement, that specific movement. So please tell us about that project, what you aim to do and how you made it happen.
So I can give a little bit of the origin. So it is a little confusing in the beginning because we called ourselves the Floating Museum, and then we floated down the river. So then we started getting caught. Oh, look, we got a lake out back. Oh, you good to float? You the water people, right? And we're like, no, it's not floating. I mean, I know it's confusing. Yes, we floated, but that's not the type of floating we're talking about. It's cool. But originally, it really came out of this idea of thinking about the Sable Museum as a cultural space, right? A museum that came out of Margaret Burrows' living room that responded to the community. It didn't have Margaret Burrows and her collaborators didn't have the idea of founding a museum. They had the idea of responding to needs. As an educator in Chicago Public Schools, there was a lack of diverse curriculum, right? And Dr. Burrows complained about it, and they didn't change the curriculum. And she said, screw it, I'll do it myself. And she opened up a little gallery in her space, started educating her kids. And the community started calling it a museum. And then she realized, oh, there's no museum like this in the world. I need to do this. And she pivoted to the needs. So the idea originally was this notion of what happens when you take a space like the Sable Museum, right, from Washington Park and moving it downtown to the cultural center. What happens to its access to resources? What happens to its community that it served? Does the community follow it? So it was really a question in the beginning. And initially, me and Jeremiah Hulsebos-Spofford had this idea of making a one-to-one model. And people laughed at us because we thought we were just going to pull wood out of a dumpster and float down the river. And Andrew was like, yeah, no, that's not how that works. That's $1 million project. You talking about, like, no, it don't work like that.
Yeah, I think I said they said, can we do this for $15,000? And I was like, well, if you doubled that and add a zero, I think we could pull that off. Yeah.
Right. So that's how it started. But as we rehearsed in Calumet, as we started learning more, we started saying we can do more than just ask a question. We can actually bring other people in to ask questions with us. And actually, so it started as a collective. It became a non-for-profit arts collective later on as well. But maybe talk a little bit about the space and the...
Yeah, well, I would say a couple things about this too. I mean, the way you describe it is as if, we did conjure that with some intentions, but it was also trial by fire for us and solidified our relationships into a family. Like it's a stressful project. We could have broken up just from the amount of stress. I mean, we had to engineer tie-offs for the river, negotiate with CDOT, negotiate with Friends of the River and the kayakers. We had to negotiate with the Coast Guard.
Y'all know
Can you just
tugboat
break
captains?
it down? What exactly? So you were trying to bring Du Sable Museum to downtown.
Originally, it was literally
How?
trying to build a building, and then it became less about the physical structure and more about what we call the Burrows Algorithm. It was that spark of response, right? Community-driven, giving intake. So you see these crates here that were built by Terry Dowd Shipping. We work with them who normally ship art, things around the world, and we wanted hollow crates, which is actually kind of hard to get art packers to make hollow crates, believe it or not, because they're like, we don't make hollow crates. And then we kind of passed these out, and we worked with a number of community organizations, 50 community organizations and artists, ranging from Project Onward, artists like William Popel, Hebrew Brantley, who's pictured here, Sky Art, and everyone we made this cabinet of curiosity, and the idea was to hit the shorelines of various places like Bridgeport, the space downtown, the river, the river walk, and then the Navy
River
Pier,
Theater.
the River Theater, and then starting out in Southeast where we had rehearsed. And the idea was kind of like hit the space, hit these docks, which we had to engineer oftentimes, and spill out into the neighborhood, right? So it's once again, we had a budget, and sometimes it wasn't just about bringing people to us. We actually went out and found partners and put money on the books to pay for a guitar player.
I also think
Now we can hear about, okay, so we have that big picture. We can hear about the negotiations.
Well,
and
one
the
of the things
challenges.
too, I think Faheem touched on, I think is really important, is that there's a kind of democratization of space in this exhibition where there are institutions that are allocated, big institutions, anchor institutions in Chicago that have the same allocation of space as an individual artist in Chicago. So there was a kind of equivalency, institutions, municipal authorities, individual artists, different constituencies, all kind of just together co-producing rather than a hierarchical structure. We kind of built a framework that we're shipping around town.
Right.
And then there's municipal engagements with the mayor's office.
Have any of y'all ever worked with tugboat captains? They're the embodiment of Popeye. And there's a whole community of tugboat captains that are like, and they're like, they're like, no, that's stupid. You can't do that. And then it's like, oh, well, if you had to do it, how would you do it? Oh, well, this is how you do it. That ain't how you do it. This is how you do it. Let's go down to the river and tell you what we need to do to make this. And then what happens is the gatekeeper becomes the stakeholder. And then they're telling you all the secrets of how to get it done because they're invested.
Right. And then you know who you didn't have to go talk to get it done. Getting back to the negotiations, right? Then you know who you got to go down and talk to get the cleat.
That's right.
Right. And so that's how all of those work. But again, it's really talking and having conversations and listening to the person that told you, you can't do that.
You can't do that.
And instead of going, okay, I can't, why?
Like, well, how would you do it?
Or how would you do it? And then that's how you do that.
Which actually became an ethic. I mean, Faheem and I joke about this. Sometimes we will go to a meeting and wait. Maybe I shouldn't say this out loud. We wait
Give
for
away all the secrets.
we wait for the person at the other side of the table to say no, because then we know we're actually pushing on something that can make change. So when we hear no, we're like, yes.
Literally, it was
Now we
like,
can start
right.
working.
I mean, we get into it, but literally the CTA told us no.
No.
Yeah.
You can't go to L and
You can't perform on trains.
on the train. No, we were like, people perform on the train every day.
Okay, let's talk about that. So it's interesting to talk about the transformation of a gatekeeper into a stakeholder via skillful bargaining
Right.
and negotiation. So another project we can look at is Cultural Transit Assembly. That's from 2018-19. You've been referencing the Green Line and CTA. So this was a multi-site public art exhibition that utilized the movement of the Green Line, produced activating it, and presented free public art programming for a highly captive audience there. Tell us about this. Because that's such a great point, Avery, that people perform on the train all the time.
All the time.
All the time.
But to do it in a way that, I don't know how you describe it, sanctioned, more organized, or where performers are
Yeah.
compensated in a way, it becomes a different thing.
That's right.
Also, you think about agency and ownership of this too. Something ad hoc and spontaneous is different than a planned, scheduled, you know,
And
presentation.
so this is another thing to understand. So we don't nobody perform on the train or nobody performs in the L because CTA goes is about everything on that train is about currency, right? And they go, well, wait, so who's gonna pay
That's right.
for the person performing on the L? That's what they mean by knowing there's no performances on the L because who's paying for this?
Who's gonna be
and
liable?
my point was, well, people get free entertainment on that joint every day. And they ain't worried about getting paid. You know, they doing what they do. What we want to do is pay artists actually come on the L during lunch hour and perform. Just show up. And they were like, and then we just had all of these papers and
Yeah, and I think it's the notion of what a train can be. We have an understanding of this, and this notion of a public space. It's a public square where you're forced to be on a train for a certain amount of time with people, and you're looking out into the land, you're looking out in the city, but then also there's this engaged unspoken word. Because I would argue when people perform on a train, most people are looking down because we know what's going to come next. Is you're going to try to hit me up for some change. So a lot of people, it took a while for them to catch on. They were looking for okay, they're going to ask for something. And everyone would say, no, this is free. We just having fun. Just calm down. And then, so the idea is we were engaging with the neighborhoods with public work outside the window. It's a viewing machine. And then also thinking about the space as a potential. Obviously, if we had our druthers, we would blow this up. So the idea of going to Lollapalooza, experiencing a concert on your way to a concert, right, totally changes your experience on the train. But it's come dream with us a little bit. And it's okay, we're going to plant a seed and then we're going to step away.
because we also understand that during Lollapalooza, a lot of people that are on the train are not on the train every day with people who are on that train every day. So during Lollapalooza, they could become an inconvenience because you just got people just on the train to go to this concert. And they get off and you get a concert. That's how we thought about it, right? And it was just really cool. But again, this particular project with Transit Assembly was also the idea of having people interested enough to then get off of a stop, right? And engage a community they wouldn't, because there was something in the park.
There's a 30-foot inflatable looking in the window.
Right, and what's that? And people would get off the L and walk into this neighborhood and go see and engage the inflatable and whatever.
It's still
else
out there,
we-
y'all, too. It's like a unicorn. Sometimes you see it and you be like, there it go, and then it's gone.
And
Yeah,
then
there's
Can you describe that inflatable we're seeing images of now?
Yeah, just quickly, there's a couple. There's the interior of the train and the performances. There's the train wrap, which is a reminder of Dusabla and Kitihawa, whose marriage allowed fur trade to happen, and without fur trade, we wouldn't have Fort Dearborn or the economy that created Chicago. So these are kind of monuments traveling around the train tracks. In addition, we activated 26 something parks with either pop-ups or some installations. So the idea too was you could take the train and hop off and see different installations adjacent to the train system. And then that inflatable is actually a collaboration with
It's an exhibition.
Yeah,
sculpture
with museums, some indigenous artists.
Yeah. Chris Papin and Monica Rickard Bolter. That's when we went down in a collaboration with the Field Museum and the Sable Museum. We built a committee, and we took the time to really think about how to, like be an ally, how to understand Potawatomi culture, how to be respectful. So these are textiles, and we didn't look at things that we weren't allowed to look at. So there are all these conversations about collections in museums, and we work with museum producers and artists who have been thinking heavily about this, about how can we create something that's respectful, right? So the pattern you see on the actual inflatable itself is Potawatomi inspired. It's not a Potawatomi textile. It's referential. And maybe you talk a little bit about the heads themselves.
The heads. We just to quote one of our partners, Janae, who says that a monument is the root of that particular word is that we remember so that we may be advised. So we also understand that monuments or public art can also be attached to development, and development can also be attached to erasure. So a lot of what we're trying to do, especially with this particular monument, was to present narratives that have been erased because of the development of this particular city, right? So we hear about Dusab, but we rarely hear about Kitihawa, who was his partner and decided to, if we were going to bring this narrative up, to also include the narrative of this woman that is always erased when you talk about it, because she was quite essential to how it went down. And then on the other side, there's the face of Harold Washington.
From the collections, unnamed artist from the collection of the Sable Museum's collection.
And then a bust of a child is the fourth head.
From William Ortiz, yeah.
Yes. And it was just our way of thinking about Chicago's past and future.
Yeah.
And
then the other two, Jean Point Baptiste, Sable, and Kitihawa, there are no images. We don't really know what they look like. But sometimes to draw someone's name out, you have to say their name and have some type of connection to that. So we actually had one of our partners from the DeSable Heritage Association, who was the president there, Etzer Kantav, who modeled for us. That's what you see. And we got these like polyester kind of uniforms and scans. Right? Yeah. And then Monica, who helped us, was one of the lead artists on the projects. We had her sit in as the model for Kitihawa as a way of
Also,
honoring that.
There are no documented photographs of either Kitihawa or DuSable, so a lot of the images you see are conjurings from people's imagination, and the more there's an image, the more it concretizes a memory of that history in people's minds. I think one other thing about the inflatable is it's deployable and removable, so we don't need to permanently occupy anybody's space. We can come in and augment activities that are already happening and help fortify activities that are already happening in space without having to kind of take over. So we tend to deploy it with other people to help bring more attention to their work.
So now Ms. Jenkins can not only have the Christmas lights, but we like, you want this 30-foot inflatable in your backyard too? She'd be like, yeah. How much that gonna cost? Oh, it didn't cost you nothing.
Cost you a thing.
Not a thing. Not a thing.
We got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's a great point about the material. I'm glad you addressed that, because it sounds like not creating this in bronze is about the fact that it can move and have a relationship with a range of neighborhoods and people, but also it's a very intentional choice. I'm sure there's other prohibitive factors around creating this in bronze, but it's an intentional choice about not kind of like fossilizing that history too, in a way.
Yep. Because history shouldn't. I mean, it's constantly evolving as we learn more, and this has been a learning exercise. I don't know what it means to be Potawatomi, you know, the descendant of Potawatomi, but Starla does, Monica does, you know, and to be the art is really the exchange, the growth. These are the byproducts of the actual artwork. It's the spectacle that we leverage to get everyone to come together to make the thing happen. Can't happen without all the people doing they work together. That's where the artwork is. That's the museum. The museum is the people. The structures are the byproduct of the network. And, you know, we can't do it. We intentionally create these impossible situations that we have to have the network to make it happen. So then now, Starla sees the work. Starla has a role in that. She can look at the thing and say, I'm proud of that. I had a significant role in making that happen. That's how you engage community.
And every time somebody walk past that monument and they see the pigtails, who that? And then you hear the story about this woman named Kitihawa. Yeah. And then that's the whole point, that the narrative now gets out and she's no longer this figure in the abyss of colonialism, you know.
Yes, and I just want to like highlight what you're saying, which is that in that is where the artwork is.
Mm-hmm. That's the artwork.
That's the art.
So the art, you know, this is process-based work. It requires highly collaborative, challenging work. Not, you know, both probably not easy to manifest, but also to describe easily.
Yep. Layered,
but
very layered.
can you just speak about the fact that, Avery, you just said that shifted understanding of what history can be or is or inclusive of, that's the work. What are these objects then? Because also where do objects play into it? Mm-hmm. Or what's the relationship between the two? Is it all the work?
Yeah, we are object-based in the sense that we go and find archives, collections, try to get permission to scan. And there's this interesting moment. These are actually 3D prints from 10 artists, wonderful, amazing artists who contributed artwork based on a poem that Avery wrote, talking about Austin, talking about 1968, and they made their responses. So these are actually 3D prints that were put out in Austin, Town Hall, in Austin neighborhood, which is furthest west before you hit Oak Park, right? And we left them open, thinking about like a ceramics exhibition, like in the Art Institute, for example, which has plinths. These are very fragile things, but they're copies. So they still embody the concepts of the objects that they reference, but they're back in the artist studios. So if the thing gets broken or reinterpreted, okay. So it's about trust. It's about vulnerability, right? And people's response to that. So when we put it in, it's probably not in here, but there were these kids just sitting on the fence. They're like, boy, we can't wait till you leave. We about to wreck all that stuff. Like, we gonna wreck it. And we were like, man, they like, that's art, huh? Okay. All right. They had their pipes. You could see them on the ground, like, we about to go to town. And so then we came over, once again, about being responsive. It just came over and they asked a question, so, hey, why don't you come help us install this? So they were like, you got glue? So we showed them how epoxy worked and how we were doing the things. And they had a different relationship with the thing.
Gatekeepers into stakeholders.
They became stakeholders. And be like, don't be knocking. We worked on that all day. You know, so having these moments, I mean, I do think we take some cues from community muralist making, like Wall of Respect. You talk about all these other artists, William Estrada. I mean, we're not the only ones working like this, but I will say, like, one of the things that we do leave, and Andrew can talk about this, we also have a lawyer that isn't here.
The lawyer,
yeah. Steven. Right. But, like, when we were in Calumet, we said we're going to build this sculpture. But it looked more like a pavilion, like a bandstand where you do a performance, and it did like a sculpture. Sculpture, you walk around, right? Or a bandstand goes up for a day or two. It's really expensive. We had it up for 3 months. We can't afford that. There was no contract, you know? There was no contract. I mean, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, the park district didn't really have a model for doing that. So legally, their department is, well, this is a lacuna in our legal, we don't know how to describe this project. So actually, our lawyer hunted us down for a year and was like, you're gonna need me at some point. And then finally we called, we're like, well, yeah, no, we need you now. So he wrote some new model contracts, negotiated with the park district, and now that's a leave behind. So if other people want to activate the park space this way, there's now a model in place for that.
At later dates.
Similarly, you know, for the river walk, there was a whole debate about whether they even wanted barges. Someone had an idea that it should be like Venice, although the river's not going to be like Venice. But they had an idea about that image, which is but there's infrastructure there, and they didn't really want barges coming back because they had that image. So we had to negotiate ways of leaving behind tie-offs. So if somebody wanted to, after we did this, return with a barge for some other program, there's infrastructure that we left behind so someone can just plug them in and tie off there and not have to worry about negotiating all of that.
I mean, they just got done, right, building this beautiful stairway. Y'all seen the river walk, right? It's beautiful. So much work and negotiation getting that thing done, right? Just launched, paint just dry, and we show up and we're like, we want to do some artwork. Oh, wonderful. What do you want to do? We want to bring a salt barge down and bank. They're like, oh, no. We work to get rid of the salt barges, but our argument was stop running away from your industrial past and lean into it. So what if the salt barge brings culture, community? We are Chicago. Like, we're proud of that. We're not Venice, so we need to lean into what it is, and we basically brought the stage.
And I think that's sad. I think it's sad that when we want to develop a thing, we have to erase the thing that was there. I'm like, completely erase it, right? To say, oh, this thing is new, and there shouldn't be a reminder. And I mean, I don't know how many of you all have been outside of the country, but I think one of the most beautiful things about spaces is that the street is 1,000 years.
Right.
A building is 10 years, and the church is 100. I think that consideration of yesterday is needed to propel tomorrow, right? Because other than that, like with the monuments, the monument is so that you remember, so that you may be advised, right? So I think it's really sad that just because something new is up, we have to completely kind of erase what was there before, because sometimes what there was before was gold and we just didn't see it that way for whatever reason or the other. You know, I'm not here to, campaign for keep old shit. I'm just saying my Big Mama watched Gunsmoke for a reason. You know what I'm saying? She you know, I mean, yeah. Michael Jackson twirling around and the internet, what you call it, the internet? Okay, the internet is doing what it do, but Gunsmoke 1230.
Right.
You know, there's a thing in it, right? There's a thing in it. And I just, like I said, I just really think it's sad when we try to act like Gunsmoke didn't exist, right?
And that those two things can live together.
And they can
that
live together.
I think of those parodies often. You can and we must think about what came before to understand what must come next.
Right.
I think similarly with these ideas of what it is to support Chicago and local is never needs to be disconnected from an interest and curiosity in the world. That those things come together. We can get new ideas from leaving, from learning, that if we understand kind of how we got to here, weave those things together to come up with the novel solutions that we need.
Yeah, I also think because we're co-producing with other people, we're also in sometimes spectators and learning from our own work, which is actually what makes it a lifelong, super rewarding practice. I would also say, to quote Avery, because we've had museums sometimes reach out and they have programs of community outreach, and Avery has reframed that, and it has stuck with me, which is we're really concerned with a shared outlook as opposed to, outreach implies us leaving some comfortable territory and going into the world. But instead, we're all citizens of the city, so it's about building a collective outlook. Yeah.
Yep, that's yep. And I think these projects that you've described very much speak to that. So I just have one more question for you, which that segues really well into, which is you've described the nature of the way Floating Museum operates, somewhat outside of the museum. You use the word adjacent. It's an adjacency. It's a counterpoint. So, and of course, you've engaged with different types of museums. Sable Museum is a very important inspiration and kind of anchor. But there's different museums. Yeah. So what happens when the museum calls and you have an invitation that is more traditional to enter and to present your work? How do you think about that? How does it make sense for you?
So yes. So number one.
Because that just happened.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's been happening. So we're looking at images from a collaboration we're doing with the museum, Musée Malmö, in Malmö, Sweden. We spent some time in Denmark. We took it on a road, which was wonderful. Avery just slept in the back of the car while I got lost in the countryside the whole time.
Fine.
And he's like, "We there yet?" I'm like, "I'm going back to sleep."
That's fine.
But COVID kind of shut that down temporarily. But this is actually what you're looking at, an exhibition in that they couldn't be here. This is the second leg of a show we did in Musée Malmö where they were going to come to Chicago. And they couldn't be here, and they couldn't negotiate space, so we figured out a way to have an exhibition move around Chicago. And the content of the videos, we asked all the artists to share some of their video work. And we curated a series of engagements with public spaces that were speaking also to the content and video. And it was a roving exhibition that would pop up in a space, and we thought about the locations as real important in Chicago and have some type of connection, dually connected kind of space. So being creative about how we think about exhibitions is real important and can live beyond that. So.
I think when you said it's something that's happening now, I think you're
Well,
referring to the Art Institute
The Art
show.
Institute.
Yeah.
So we're also working with the photography department at the Art Institute. I think one of the ways we would go.
Curators is here, Liz.
Yeah.
Hey, Liz, how you doing? We've been giving her a lot of headaches,
And
y'all.
That's how we met Michael.
So y'all be nice to her because she's been nice to us.
But I think we look at the structure of that, the practice, the structure of the space, what's in the collection, and in the case of the Art Institute, there was in the 40s and 50s, there was an art and lending gallery where you could go get a Jim Nutt and bring it home,
Richard Hunt,
or Ed Paschke, and you could hang it on your wall for a couple months and decide if you liked it, and then you could potentially buy it. And I think at the time it was maybe a more privileged group of people having that kind of access, but the relationship between the museum and its public was really interesting. It's a totally different kind of relationship, a service relationship, and so the upcoming exhibition taps into that history but reshapes it in a different way.
Right. So it doesn't highlight privilege as the accessibility, right? So it more so highlights relationship, and the a lion for every house,
That's the name of the show.
That's the name of the show, which is partly taken from the book by Sonia Sanchez, Does Your House Have Lions? And what she means by lions, she's talking about a community, she's talking about protection. I've decided we could flip the lion to these artifacts. Does your house have, because of those lions, literally, like the lions in the front of the art museum, does your house deserves art? And guess what? Your house actually has it.
That's right.
It's not like it doesn't. The value is not in these things that are in the collection in these institutions downtown. The value is where you may place grandma's Bible.
That's right.
Next to Richard Hunt's
That's right.
photograph, and that's the value we want to talk about in this particular, or what we're talking about in this particular exit. But I think we like at our last minute. I just want to say it to everybody.
Yeah, and I think just going back a little bit about the roles of like we love our museums. I love showing. Of course, I want to show art. I mean, but I'm less. But we also have our own spaces, and I'm gonna spend less time trying to change that space as much as I'm going to spend building our own space, right? As once again showing through examples, planting seeds. You could do this too, right? So I think in a lot of ways what we talk about in all our, because people ask like, how do we curate and how do we select? It's really that like dinner table type of analogy that everybody needs to eat. You're gonna bring the potato salad, you're gonna bring the coleslaw, someone gonna bring the turkey. But sometimes our larger institutions think they're the dinner table. And they get to own the table and be like, nope, sit your ass down at the table and make sure your macaroni is good and we're all gonna eat. And when we pull away, right, well, if someone's not eating, we need to shift, or maybe this ain't that opportunity, right? So it's real important that we're all kind of contributing so that when things get rough, it's not a charitable exchange. When things get rough, you lean in on your partners harder. I really depend on them when I go through a hard time. I know I can step away and lean on any one of my partners to step in. Just like Jeremiah couldn't be here today, but he's totally confident we can handle this and vice versa, right? So the same sort of way of thinking about community exchange, that when times get rough, you go to the people who can help you get through the rough time versus, hey, we got to cut some dead weight. You cut the charitable thing when times get rough. It's not necessary. So building spaces where we can actually do things together and rely on each other, lean into our expertise is real important. So we spend a lot of time thinking about who we collaborate with, not just beautiful artwork, but who are the communities, who are the networks, what are the things that they need in exchange. So all the artists that we're collaborating with in this exhibition, many of them, this would be their first time exhibiting in a museum.
Anywhere, right?
And some of them anywhere, but they're going to be in a museum anyway. We already know that because they're that talented. So that's all those things come into mind about how a moment can benefit everybody. And
also,
so,
I would say, and this is not just museums, this is CDOT, IDOT, that you'll encounter people who the conditions of their employment require them to do X, Y, and Z, but outside they're a poet, or they're a painter, or they're an aspiring musician, or something. And so there's already allies within the organization, and organizations have a structure just like infrastructure. They're kind of big, slow-moving ships because they also generate momentum that way. So I think every institution, including Department of Planning and Development, there's people with artistic impulses across the city, and it's just a matter of delivering an opportunity to engage in that way. And I think we found a lot of really goodwill. So even though some people will say no, they want to say yes. And we work out the conditions until they're able to.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think, too, what's striking to me is that you are interested in remaking or kind of fortifying the social fabric in these ways, but then you're also interested in codifying it, too, kind of creating those contracts. So the fact that those things go hand in hand in the way you discuss it, it's not surprising to me that these larger institutions are shifting. That they might adopt some of these practices.
yeah, and
The
we're
Art
not
Institute
harsh.
had a block party.
Yeah, we understand. I used to run the arts nonprofit.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm realistic about, we can be pragmatic about some of the things that just ain't gonna work. And that's, once again, it's like, we get it. We don't wanna make your job hard. But there's some things we really need, but we get it. Maybe we can't do that. So we're also sensitive to not making people's jobs hard. So Liz has been wonderful, but Liz knows we got her back too.
Right. Well, I think that this would be a great time to kind of take a pause here and invite any questions in from the audience.
It's a lot
I
of stuff.
don't think we had that.
Eric's doing a great job.
Somebody keep walking around.
He's ad-libbing these images, y'all. He's just
Right.
responding to the conversation.
Responding.
He's performing for us right now. So Eric is also one of our amazing collaborators. a lot of the photography you see, that's Eric, and he's come on. He's actually, he's kind of on stage with us right now, as well as Kusha Lavora. I just have to call out who was taking the lead on our next big inflatable. We'll be launching soon, and we've been working with her for a year as well. Oh, there! Look at you, man.
You said that's what he's supposed to do.
Ain't he good?
You said he's supposed to pull it up.
You know? But we have some really amazing, it's not just the ones on stage. We have some amazing collaborators with really deep ties, and they get it. And we're happy to be doing the work. But I guess one questions.
There's a microphone going around. Any
Your first question right here on the aisle.
Hello. Thank you for the talk. This has been good. For the floating museum, so like for the pieces that you all did in like 2017 or 2018, are they still floating or do they archive somewhere? Like how are you all like holding the pieces or do they continue moving?
Yeah, so there's some pragmatic things. Initially the idea was that if we're gonna do work in a neighborhood, then we should be in the neighborhood, right? So we should not go somewhere else. We should be in that space, occupy that space, be a part of it, really learn as a way. But, you know, when you have a barge, we have street signs, inflatables, you know, there's only so much space in our homes to store things. So recently we actually have a building, a warehouse now that it's not like a museum, but it's more of a built around rehearsal. There it is right there. It's practice. It's for the artists, it's for the community, for us to come in and rehearse. So now we can say, hey, you know, we have some flexibility. Hey, we would love to give you support the work you're doing, but we also got this space over here. You want to come in here and jam out with us, practice, and we deploy from this space. So we're still located, but this is where the stuff goes. So we do have some storage.
This is just an anecdote, but that train that was running around was only supposed to go for 6 months. That's what we paid for. I think that was 4 years ago. It is still, I still
You'll
see
it on the green and pink line. If you see it, wave at it. I've only
get
been
the
on it one
highway.
time.
Get the sub, holding strong on the L. They holding on.
Students of mine will send me pictures of it. Like, it's still out there.
Did you see it?
The other thing is, you know, we were paying for shipping containers, storage rooms. We were, you know, we had to find a place to put things. They were scattered all over the city. And at some point we realized we were spending way more on that than if we just consolidated. And so the other thing that's happening now that because we didn't just want a warehouse, one of the things, because our practice is a network that expands and is collaborative, because of that Sustainable Societies event, the Swedish consulate showed up because we were hosting artists from Sweden, Denmark, and Norway. There they are. We're starting to think about that space now to expand it to make residencies so that Chicago artists and international artists could collaborate together and also develop artistic practice in an international scale. You know, when we go to a museum here, people are super nice, but when we go to a museum in Denmark, suddenly there's coffee and tea service and like red carpets. And when artists come from overseas, they experience the same thing on this side of the ocean. They're celebrities. And we think there's a way everyone is enthusiastic about this exchange. I think one of the things for us too is some of the ways that political things express themselves, say in Chicago, the deep structure of that is similar to the way it might express itself in Greenland, where there's, you know, uranium mining that is causing bad health conditions for indigenous people living in Greenland. It's not the same expression, although we have copper mines out in Crested Butte that are having similar effect, arsenic poisoning, but it's similar structural things that just express themselves differently in different spaces. So there are artists, like when we went to Denmark, there were artists working about, you know, we talk a lot about monuments here because of our current debates. They're talking about monuments in the same way, but with a different nuance because the history of the space and politics is different. So we just thought it would be really great to expand our network internationally that way and also allow people to develop, artists to develop an international profile together. Through collaborations.
That was a long answer.
Yeah, sorry.
Thanks for setting that up.
Question right here. I
was just curious about funding. You guys don't seem to have that restriction on funding. I mean, is there just an open pile of money there? I'm waiting for somebody to say like, well, we were going to do this, but we don't have the financial resources.
No, that's a good question. My students, it all cracks me up when my students ask. I said, I know what y'all want to ask. Just ask. Who's paying for all this, right? Well, first, before we get started, I'd like to thank Art Design Chicago and the Terra Foundation for their generous support in the making of the inflatable. But seriously, one of the things that we found when we went overseas, which was mind-blowing, is how much the government actually funds culture and arts. And when we come over, we kind of come, initially things started out as like the people who would buy our art. Like me and Jeremiah, we were sculptors. We sell sculpture. I came from the Southside Community Arts Center as a former director. So part of the reason I think that we did become a non-for-profit was leaning into some of that experience of kind of private foundations, some funding, and we kind of slowly built, and as we've grown, right? So it is a patch quilt. It's like singular, like the river assembly, floating down the river, that was like, I mean, rolling up the sleeves, $5,000 donations, $1,000 donations. So all the work you see in the studio, all the work you see in the community, we were doing that same amount of work of hosting parties, get-togethers, coffees, really trying to share a vision on something that was kind of like impossible at the time. But once you do that, the CTA, we took all that network with us to the next project and to the next project. So when we say our family, the assumption of the Floating Museum is that it's just people. Well, the way we kind of talk about community, right? Our community also includes our donors. They're a part of our network. They're at the table too because they have a set of needs as well. And we try to figure out ways that we can satisfy some of the missions of the organization. And they understand. Like we can say, hey, we don't know how to do this. We want to get a building. We've never done it. How can, oh, well, let me introduce you to that person. So we're a scrappy kind of group. But we're not the only scrappy ones. Like a lot of the funding here isn't government. It comes from local foundations, private donors, but we're not the only ones that work like that. So when we go over to Denmark and they hear about this, they're like, that's insane. Like, how do you do that? And same questions. And we talk about our ways, and then we hear like, wait a minute, you're 100% funded by that's insane. But it's a double-edged sword. There's a certain amount of freedom we get in that type of funding, right? Versus if you're 20 years in Copenhagen and you're all government funded and the government decides we're going to start shifting culture to the suburbs, you need to pack your stuff and go to the suburbs or you're not going to be funded. It's a different, there's pros and cons to both types of funding as well.
But no, it's constant work.
It's constant.
Yeah.
It's constant. But it's love. It's a lot of love.
This will be our last question down here.
Oh, man. We talk too much.
I was just curious, how do we find out about these funding opportunities and future projects?
Yeah. We have a website, floatingmuseum.org, that you can find us. If you can't remember that, just Google the Floating Museum Chicago. There are not many in Chicago. It will pop up. For the art exhibition that's coming up at the Art Institute, which we're really excited about, we're taking over the photo galleries. That'll be opening on June 11th throughout 5 months, right, Liz? It's five months? It's going to be up for a while. So we're excited. We're going to have a number of programs with that as well. We invite you to come out. You can go to the Art Institute's website and find information about that exhibition. Also, social media platforms. We're pretty much on all the social media platforms if you want to see more of these images as well.
And if people wanted to donate to a particular project, they would do that through the website?
Yes, you can go to the website and just click on which project you want to go to, and you can get some of the random things on our social media as well. It's pretty dense. There's some layers here. And there's also this great donate button at the bottom. You're asking about that funding, right? So if you or your wealthy cousin got some money sitting around, listen, every nickel, every dime, tell people about us, but giving to the Floating Museum is giving back to the city because it comes in and goes right back out.
And we pass through to a lot of artists. We pass through funding. Right. Because that's part of the struggle in Chicago, yeah.
Because we've gone to institutions, all of us, come down, give away to gyms, and walk out and don't even give a parking voucher. And we're like, damn, I
Right,
lost
we,
money.
we had
I
to,
lost money
wait,
on
hold
the deal.
up. It on Soel, we had to pay to get on the air.
Oh, yeah, we had to figure that out. So we need money for train tickets.
we had to pay to get on the
They
air.
were like, look, we
The
can't give you no
CCA
money.
like-
No money.
Yeah.
No, we can't give you
no
nothing. Not a
money.
nickel, not a dime. We know.
We
We want to, but we can't.
But that money, we like this is love and passion because we don't get nothing.
He said we don't get paid.
Right, we don't get paid at all.
That's what he mean to say.
You know, but what we are rallying for though is Starla and Coco
Our artists always
and
okay.
Hebrew and Tracy D. Hall or whoever our community partners, that we're not asking them
That's right.
to do work for free because Abraham Lincoln signed a sheet of paper many years ago. That's it. That whole thing is supposed to go down. So a lot of what you're donating to is that the act of the work, and it's really not
Our
us.
big dream, so we leave you with maybe our big kind of ambitious goal is to take the big budget, like exhibition budget, like the big budget, the big show, right? And take that same amount of money and remove the structure and put it out into like the open space, right? And as an organization, our long-term goal is for every dollar we put in infrastructure, that's the building, the warehouse, the production of the barge, an equal amount of dollar goes into the people. So a one-to-one model. That's an ambitious goal, but if the content comes from the people, then they should be getting equal shares of the budget. So that's our long-term goal. We're a long way from that, but we make sure we pay our people first.
That's the long-term vision. And then in the more short term, June 11th, the Art Institute
June 11th.
exhibition
In short term,
opens.
we got to renovate a building because there ain't no roof on it. So it's a lot of buckets. So either bring some Home Depot buckets with you, or go to that donate button because it's
Those
wet
two
and
places.
cold and humid at the same time.
And June 11th, our show opens at the Art Institute.
Yes.
Art Institute and the Floating Museum will do new activations, a new inflatable later this summer.
Yes, Kushla Vora has been working, flying back and forth to India, scanning banyan trees, and we're really looking at the input of South Asian communities in Chicago's role. So Kushla is over the next year going to be taking the lead with us to guide us on thinking about how to thoughtfully support our South Asian communities to better understand. And there's going to be a 30-foot inflatable to go with it. So look out for that. We're going to build a whole mall. We ain't going to have one. We got more of them coming.
Lots
There's
going on.
some exciting stuff coming down the pipeline.
Thank you so much, Avery, Faheem, Andrew. Wonderful to
you.
speak
Thank
with
you.
you. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.